Let's begin. Continue to daven that the spirit of our learning should be to bring home the hostages, to protect our soldiers and Am Yisrael and all of the innocents, and bring a speedy end to this war.
Amen.
With that, let's go back. So last week, we were exposed to this, to some concepts in the Ela, which I feel I didn't express entirely well. As I should have prepared more. I prepared more this week, but we don't have to go through. I've been reviewing the Ela since last week. We don't have to go through everything, but let's just look for a moment again at this Mishnah that the Gemara is going to refer to. So this is the Mishnah Me'ila Perek Daled, and it says Kodshei excuse me, 1 second. Actually, so wait, I'll say one other thing though, just as a general reference to Me'ila. So Me'ila is an idea that you're not allowed to benefit from something that's Kodesh, that belongs to God, essentially. And so depending on what the particular item is, Me'ila will be an issue or not, depending on the item and depending on its particulars. So, like we mentioned last week, that first of all, broadly speaking, we have two kinds of kodesh things, two types of kodashim, which are subject to Me'ila, and one of them is kodshei mizbeach, and the other is kodshei Bedek Abayit. So Kodshei Mizbeach would be anything that is dedicated to be brought as a sacrifice on the Mizbeach. So that includes animals for various korbanot, and then those divide into Kodshei Kodashim and Kodashim Kalim, depending on the particular korban, like a chatat and olah is Kodshei Kodashim, a Shlamim is Kodshei Kalim. We also have Korbanot Mincha. We have Korbanot Yayin, right? We have Misucha Yayin. We have Korbanot of Solet and so forth. So all of anything that's Ra'ui to go onto the Mizbeach, that was dedicated to go onto the Mizbeach.
Also the loaves on the Ma'arechet, they also
yes. Yes. Actually, the Mishnah talks about that also. So anything like that is considered to be Kodshei Mizbeach, and once it or the whatever part of it becomes mutar for either for a person, it was either for Kohanim or for anybody else, then there's no longer an issue of Me'ila, at least D'oraita. So we said last week about Kodshei Kodashim that your Mo'el b'Kodshei Kodashim from the time they're Ukdash, in other words, from the time you say, I'm bringing this korban, let's say, is a korban chatat, until Zrikat Adam. So we have the process of bringing a korban chatat, which is going to involve shchita, kabbalat adam, holachat adam, the mizbeach, and then Zrikat Adam on mizbeach. Once there's Zrikat Adam, then the parts of the chatat that are mutar for the kohanim to eat, in principle, at that moment, become permissible for the Kohanim to eat. So at that moment, the korban no longer has an issue of me'ilah. With Kadshei Bedek Habayit, Kadshei Bedek Habayit is anything that's dedicated to the Beit HaMikdash. That then it becomes property of the Beit HaMikdash, becomes property of Bedek Habayit, which effectively is like the product, the property of the Kadosh Baruch Hu. So it has kedusha because now it doesn't belong to a person anymore; it belongs to Kodesh. So and there also, even if it's an animal, people can dedicate animals to the Bedek Habayit. That's not the same as dedicating them to the Mizbeach. The animal becomes property of Bedek Habayit, and Bedek Habayit can do what the Gizbarim, right, the people in charge, like the controllers who oversee Bedek Habayit, they'll make decisions. They're like financial decisions and practical decisions about how to use this property. So, okay. The other thing which I think I mixed up last week, and I didn't get to listen to the share that I was explaining to Michael Schwartz. I didn't get to listen to my own share last week because of technical issues. But when the Mishnah here is going to talk about Pigul Notar V'Tamei, it's talking about the Isur of eating Pigul Notar V'Tamei. And actually, I have to bring that up. We've looked at this before. No, I'll leave that for now. We'll just go with what I'm saying. Okay, so we looked at a couple of Mishnayot last week. We'll look at these two in particular. The first Mishnah, Me'ila Perek Dalet, Kadshei HaMizbeach Mitztarfim Ze Im Ze LeMe'ila U'Lechayev Aleihem Mishum Pigul Notar V'Tamei. So now we understand, Kadshei HaMizbeach are these things that I talked about, right? They're korbanot that are going to actually be brought or intended to be brought onto the Mizbeach. So what does it mean, the Kadshei HaMizbeach Mitztarfim Ze Im Ze LeMe'ila? So the Bartenu explains, Michael, what did you want to say?
I'm sure Bartenu will say it much better than I can.
It's okay, you can go ahead and say what you want to say.
I mean, presumably it is analogous to how the shiurim for the isur on food and drink join to each other.
Okay.
So they.
So what does it mean? What does it mean practically to say Kadshei Mizbeach Mitztarfim Ze Im Ze LeMe'ila? What does it mean practically?
So
what's an example?
I'm assuming that here it's referring to achila, and so
don't assume that, because me'ilah doesn't necessarily, it could include eating, but it can include any kind of benefit that one might get from these things. So we mentioned last week that the shiur from me'ilah is shaveh pruta. That is, if you get a benefit that's worth at least the value of a pruta, then you're chayav for me'ilah. That's the determining factor for me'ilah. Could be that you ate a little bit of the korban. Could also be that you took some of the fur and used it, to warm yourself. There are other examples of, you can think of other examples to use. You could have taken part of the korban and burnt it to light a fire, to warm yourself, or to bake something. All of those things, in any way that you get benefit from it, then you'll be chayav for mi'ila. There's
So
go ahead.
would this benefit include the labor of a designated animal? Or does it only refer to like physical parts of the animal?
Yeah, it could in principle refer to that. To give you other examples that the Mishnah talks about later on, broadly speaking, this breaks down into two categories. There's certain types of benefit. There's certain things that when you benefit from them, you're liable to damage them. So, for example, if you tear off some hair from a korban, from an animal that's supposed to be a korban before it was sacrificed, then that may render it, depending on the animal, it may render it no longer fit to be a korban. So you've ruined it in some way. But let's say you have kadshe bedek habayit. Let's say somebody dedicated a gold cup to bedek habayit, a gold goblet, and you fill it up with wine and drink some wine. So you haven't damaged the cup, but you did benefit from the cup. So in some cases, mi'ila could involve, it might involve damage to the object, it might not. And the hashlachot for that, the implications of that are something we're not going to get into today because we're not really studying mi'ila per se. But just to give you an idea of the scope of mi'ila.
But then you don't know anymore what is the shiur.
No, so there's a
talk
formula.
about shiur of money or of eating, but if you
No, again,
just
here we're talking about the shiur. There's a value. So let's say in the case of if you drank out of a gold cup, so what's the value? So the way that would be, in other words, you have to have hana'av shapruta. So the way that would be evaluated is we would say to somebody, how much would you be willing to pay to drink from that gold cup? There's another example. They talk about if you take, let's say, a beautiful necklace that had been dedicated to bedek habayit, and let's say a woman wears it. So then we would figure out how much would she have been willing to pay to let somebody wear a piece of jewelry like that. But it's all ultimately the chishuv, right? The calculation is a calculation of monetary worth. How much is it worth it to you? In other cases, it's easier. Let's say if you took a piece of meat, so we know we can go to the shuk and say how much would a piece of meat like that cost. But other things that are more intangible, then we use a different kind of formula. But ultimately, the shiur is always going to be that you had to be neheneh b'shaveh pruta. You had to get the benefit of something that was worth at least the value of a pruta, which of course is not very much. But those are the ways that you would evaluate it. So now when the Mishnah says, Kadshei HaMizbeach mitztarfin zeh im zeh, so what does that mean? So Bartinu explains, Im neheneh bishnei minei Kadshei Mizbeach b'shaveh pruta ma'a. So let's say he took a half a pruta's worth from one korban and a half a pruta's worth of benefit from another one. So those two chatzi prutot are going to be together. They will be mitzdaref, and he'll be chayav for mi'ila. Umitzdarfim nami l'kazayit l'chayev alei mishum ochel pigul o notar otamei. O l'chayev l'ma'alech hazayit b'chutz. So what are the other things that the Mishnah is talking about? You can also be the Kodshe Mizbeach are also mitzaref to make somebody chayav for, let's say, pigul. So what would that be? So let's say you had two different korbanot, which the Kohen was mefagel, right? That he said, as he was doing one of the four avodot, he had in mind that it was going to be sacrificed not in its proper time. Right? So then the resulting animal is pigul. If somebody eats from that, they're chayav. So as we've learned until now, the shiur of isur for eating a thing, a particular isur, is a kazayit. So it's asur to eat pigul, it's asur to eat notar, right? So let's say we just had Pesach. So if you didn't eat your korban Pesach by midnight, if you eat after midnight a kazayit, then you're chayav for eating notar. Or if you eat a korban that's tameh, you're also chayav. So in all of those cases, a half a kazayit from one korban and a half a kazayit from another korban are mitzaref for those shiur. So it's a different shiur. We have a shiur for mi'ilah. That's if you're naneh b'shaveh pruta. We have another shiur for achila of pigul notar v'tameh. And the Bartanura adds in another isur, which is chayev l'maleh kazayit b'chutz. You're not allowed to shecht a korban in the azara, and then to bring it outside of the Beit HaMikdash and burn it there, right? To be maleh, that to burn it as a korban outside of the Beit HaMikdash. So all of those things, all of those latter four things, pigul notar v'tameh and maleh b'chutz, they're a kazayit. And if you do a half a kazayit from one, a half a kazayit from another, or 10 tenths of a kazayit from 10 different korbanot, doesn't matter what the tziruf is, then you're going to be chayav. Kadshe bedek, back to the Mishnah, kadshe bedek habayit mitzdarfin zayin. So similarly, yes.
What happens if the people of the Mikdash sell the golden cup, which belongs to Bedek Habayit? Are they allowed to sell it, to take the money, to give it to a kablan to fix something in the Beit HaMikdash? But afterwards, what happens to the cup? It's no more, there is no more me'ilah if you use it or something like this? Or?
Right. You can, it's called, that's pidyon. You can be podeh.
You can do pidyon.
You can be podeh Bedek Habayit. In fact, of course, because the financial basis for the ongoing upkeep of the Beit HaMikdash is dependent on that din. So if somebody, and that's the idea, you can donate money to Bedek Habayit, but you can donate things to Bedek Habayit, and then the things that they have. Also, look, if you donate money, it also becomes kodesh. There's also meaning about that. But let's say if you donate, let's say you donate a calf to Bedek Habayit can sell that, and then the person who buys it, it's no longer kodesh to them. It becomes fulin. And then the money becomes kodesh.
You call this pidyon, like pidyon haben is also something like this.
It gets into into a notion which I sometimes
also for
talk
the Kohen,
about.
Okay.
Well, and Leil HaSeder, one of the interesting things to talk about, to my mind, I've done it before, is what are the definitions of pidyon and geula? They're used similarly in the Torah, but they're not the same. But in any event, I'm going to leave that aside. It's an interesting thing which we won't get into. So here, the the Mishnah says Kachay Bedek Abayit Mitzdarfim Zaim Zeh. So what does that mean? So the Bartanur says they're Mitzdarfim Zaim Zeh L'Mi'ilah, right? In other words, if you're Naneh Shavapruta from two different things from Kachay Bedek Abayit. By the way, I wanted to also explain one other thing from last week. Paul, you asked, what if a lot of time passes between the first Shaveh Pruta and the second Shaveh Pruta?
Okay.
But what I wanted to explain is that it won't matter kol zman that it's be'elem echad. In other words, what we're talking about here for the if you're over on mi'ilah b'shogeg, then you have to pay Karen Chomesh and you bring a korban mi'ilah. So you won't pay the Karen, the Chomesh, and the korban mi'ilah unless you did each of the parts of that, whatever, let's say half a Sheva Pruta here and half a Sheva Pruta here, be'elem echad. So it meant that you went, like maybe you started off and you didn't know anything about the dinim of mi'ilah. So, and then you took it, you were from, half a Sheva Pruta of Bedek Abayit here, and then a year later you were from half a Sheva Pruta of Bedek Abayit. Those will be mitzdaref kol zman that you don't know that you're not allowed to do that. So either you didn't know that you're not allowed to do it, or you knew you're not allowed to be nanemi Bedek Abayit, but let's say you didn't realize that what you're getting hana from, in fact, is Bedek Abayit. In other words, anytime it's shogeg, as long as it's be'elem echad, as long as it's in one unconscious state, that is, you're not conscious fully of the situation or the halacha. Okay. So Kachay Bedek Abayit Mitzdarfim Zaim Zeh. The Bartanur says L'mi'ilah Aval Pigul v'Notar b'Tamei Ein Bahem. Right. So Kachay Bedek Abayit, even if it's an animal, there is no din of Pigul, Notar, or Tamei. Pigul, Notar, and Tamei are categories that are only pertinent to Kachay Mizbeach. They're only pertinent to korbanot that are brought onto the Mizbeach. Then the last line, Kachay HaMizbeach, the Kachay Bedek Habayit, Mitztarfin Ze Im Ze L'mi'ilah. In other words, since I can be Mo'el Gam b'kachay hamizbeach, v'gam b'kachay bedek habayit. So if I did half a Sheva Pruta from kachay hamizbeach, and it was then half a Sheva Pruta from kachay bedek habayit, those will be mitzdaref because they're all under the category of mi'ilah, as the Bartanura says. Kachay mizbeach v'kachay bedek habayit mitzarfim zeim zeh l'mi'ilah, avol lo l'davar acher k'damran. They're not mitzdaref for other purposes. As we said, the kachay bedek habayit let b'hu pigul v'notar b'tamei. And certainly, in other words, you can't be neh from, you can't, let's say, eat pigul from Kachay Mizbeach and have half a kazayit of pigul from Kachay Mizbeach. There is no pigul that you could eat from Bedek Abayit to be mitzdaref. It just doesn't exist. So there is no tziruf there. So, but what we see from the Mishnah is dealing with this idea of tziruf. If I say that the Torah says I'm not allowed to be nehaneh from Kachay Mizbeach, does it matter if the hana'ai get comes from more than one item of Kodshim, more than one thing that was Kodesh? So the answer is no. If you're nehaneh from Kachay Mizbeach, even a little bit, but it'll be mitzaref with the other little bits you have to be over once you reach the level of a shaveh pruta. Then we didn't do this last week. I skipped it. But here, actually, we'll just do the beginning. Chamisha dvarim ba'olam mitzarfim ze im ze. So there are 5 things about a korban olah that are mitzaref, this with the other. Habasar. So remember, korban olah is entirely burnt on the mizbeach, except for the skin. The skin belongs to the kohanim. That's midioraita. So there are 5 things in an olah that are mitzarfin zeim zeh for this purpose. For all the purposes that we mentioned earlier, that is, for pikul notar v'tameh, and for me'ilah, and to be ma'aleh b'chutz. So what are they? Habasar, the hachelev, right? The meat, the fat that has to be burnt on the mizbech, the hasolet, the fine flour that's brought with an olah, the hayayin, the wine that's brought with the olah, the hashamen, that's also brought with the olah. And there's 6 with the todah. Korban todah has 6 things that are mitzaref saying. And what are they? The basar, the chalev, the solet, the yain, the shemen, the halechem. Right. So you have special lechem that comes with the todah, including matzah and chametz. But it doesn't matter. It's that in addition to the 5 things that are brought within, that are altogether part of the korban olah, with the todah of 6 things. Okay, so Bartinu explains chamisha dvarim ba'olam mitzarfim zeim zeh lekazayit l'chayev mishum ma'aleh b'chutz l'chayev mishum pigul v'notar v'tameh. So these 5 things. So it means that if I ate a half a kazayit of basar and a half a kazayit of solet, then those will be mitzaref for me to be chayav pigul, if that olah became pigul. And also, mishum mi'ilah, imene mikulan b'shaveh pruta. So I have 5 things. If I had a fifth of a pruta of hana'ah from each of these things, the basar, the chayla, the solet, the yain, the shemen, they would all be mitzaref to 1 shaveh pruta of hana'ah, which would make me chayav for korban mitzvah. All right. Now, I'm going to skip the rest of that Mishnah. We'll go here to Mishnah Gimel. Kol ha'pigulin mitzarfim zeh im zeh. Kol ha'notarim mitzarfim zeh im zeh. Kol ha'nevelot mitzarfot zo im zo. So what does that mean? So pigul is mitzaref zeh im zeh, meaning if I have pigulim from different korbanot, as the Bartenu explains, kol pigulim me'olah, me'chatat, me'asham, and mishlamim. So if I ate half a kazayit from a korban hasham and half a kazayit from a chatat that were both pigul, they're mitzaref, even though they're different korbanot. No, in other words, not just different physically korbanot, they're different categories of korbanot. But for this purpose, it goes after what we said earlier, the kachei mizbeach are mitzarfim zeim zeh. Kol nevelot mitzarfot zeim zeh. And what does that mean? La'ochel mehen kazayit liyot chayav karet. You're not allowed to eat a nevela. Again, achila is a sur b'kazayit. So if I had a nevela from this cow and I had a nevela from this sheep, and I ate a half a kazayit from each of them, then I would be chayav for eating from a nevela. Kol hashratzim mitzarfim zeim zeh. And Bartenu explains that this is how this works with nevela from behemoth tameh, behemoth Torah. We don't have to go into that. Kol hashratzim mitzarfim zeim zeh lekazayit. Bartenu says l'chayev et ha'ochlan malkot. So if you eat from a sheretz, you eat a kazayit of a sheretz, then you're chayav malkot. שמונה שרצים הכתובים בתורה מצטרפים זה עם זה. The shratzim we're talking about are the 8 shratzim that are listed in the Torah. מחייב האוכלן בחדשה. כשיעור תומתן, כך שיעור אכילתן. The shiur for sheretz for tuma is ka'adasha. That is, if you have a lentil-sized piece of a sheretz, that's mitameh. You have a little teeny bit, like a lentil size of a sheretz, and it, let's say, falls into a kli cheres, it makes the kli cheres tameh, for example. Dam asher to b'saro mitztarfim. Both the blood and the flesh of the sheretz combined together also for a shiur. There's a special drasha for them. Bartim says, "De marbina mikra diktiv, v'zelachem atamei b'sheretz asheretz haaretz." Rabot dam asheretz sheyeh mitamei kivsaro. If the blood of the sheretz is mitamei, the same as its flesh is mitamei. Then we get to Rabbi Yeshua, and this is the part that our Gemara is going to quote. Klal amar Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua said a general rule. Kol shetumato v'shiuro shavim. Mitztarfim ze im ze. Anything whose tuma and its shiur are the same, combine with one another. So what does it mean, tuma on the one hand and its shiur on the other hand? So how do we understand that? There's each of the different categories of avot tuma, things that are main categories of tuma, and how much tuma they impart. So let's say if you touch a nevela, then you're tameh for the day. You could go to after you touch it, you can go to the mikvah, and then at night you'll be with nightfall you will become tahor. But if you touch a dead person, you're tameh for 7 days, and you have to have the talich of para aduma in order to become tahor. So the tuma of a nevela and the tuma of a mate are not shavim. They're not the same. And what about the shiur? So the shiur of a kazayit from a nevela is mitameh. The shiur of a kazayit from a mate is mitameh. So their shiur is the same, but their tuma isn't the same. But let's say, what does it mean? Kol shetumato v'shiro shavim. So let's say a nevela here and a nevela there. They're both of the same. They have the same din. They're both nevelot, so they have the same level of tuma, and they're the same level of the same shiur for eating that you'll be over on eating a nevela. So kol shetumato v'shiro shavim mitztarfim ze im ze. That's the general rule. So if I have but tumato v'lo shiuro. So let's say I have two things whose tuma is the same, but their shiur for, let's say, eating is not the same. So tumato v'lo shiuro. So Bartinu gives the example. Kigon nevela v'sheretz. Let's say you have a nevela and you have a sheretz. The tumatan shava. They have the same. They impart tuma in the same way. The tarvayu habi tumatan ad ha'erev. Right? If you come into contact with a nevela or with a sheretz, then you go to the mikvah and you're tamei until the evening. But lo shiuro, right? The nevela shiur tumata b'kazayit B'sheretz shiuro b'chadasha. Their tuma isn't the shiur of their tuma isn't the same. The shiur for a nevela to impart tuma is you just need a kazayit from a nevela to impart tuma, and I only need an adasha from a sheretz to impart tuma. So tumato velo shiuro. What's an example of shiuro velo tumato? So shiuro velo tumato would be kagon nevela umeit. The tarvayim mitamim b'kazayit, their shiur is the same. If I have a kazayit from a nevela and a kazayit from a mate, they both impart tuma. So the shiur of the minimum shiur you need to impart tuma is kazayit in both cases, but lo tumato, their tuma is not the same, because tumat mate makes somebody tameh for 7 days, and tumat nevela makes somebody tumat nevela makes somebody tameh only until the evening. And then the third category, lo tumato velo shiuro, things that have neither tuma nor shiur in common, could go mate v'sheretz, right? The tumat mate habi shiva, right? If you come in contact with the mate, you're tamei for 7 days. Tumat sheretz is ad ha'erev. So we already know their tuma is different. We also know their shiur is different, because the shiur of a mate is kazayin, and the shiur of a sheretz is ka'adasha. So this is right. Lo tumat elosha emit starfim zaim. So that's Rabbi Yeshua. So Rabbi Yeshua divides, he makes these kinds of divisions. So now, back to our Gemara. Why is this important to us? Because in our Gemara, we're discussing this question of tziruf. The Mishnah, our Mishnah in Yoma says, "Ha'ochel v'ashoteh ein mitztarfim." And again, when we went over the Mishnah, it was Paul actually who brought this up as a question about what is the meaning of the tziruf, right? So are they not? So he offered the idea that they're not mitzaref because their shiurim are different. The shiur for ochel is kikotevet, kikotevet agasa, and the shiur for drinking is kimlo lugmav. So maybe the reason that the Mishnah says they're not mitzaref is because you won't be able to get a shiur by combining the two, because they use different measures. So our Gemara says, Man Tana, who's the Tana that learned our Mishnah that said, Ochel v'shoteh ein mitzarfim, meaning the Mishnah is a stam Mishnah. It doesn't tell us who authored the Mishnah, and we want to know who is the author of the Mishnah. So Amar Rav Chisda b'machloket shnuya. Actually, this issue it was learned as a machloket. Rabbi Yeshua, and our Mishnah goes like the side of the machloket, which is Rabbi Yeshua's shita. Deep none, as we learn in the Mishnah. We learn in the Mishnah in Me'ilah that we just looked at. Klal Amar Rabbi Yeshua, kosher tumato v'shiro shaveh mitzaref, tumato v'lo shiro, shiro v'lo tumato v'lo shiro, ein mitzarfim. So why does Rav Chisda think that Rabbi Yoshua is the author of our Mishnah? What does he see about Rabbi Yeshua's shita in Me'ilah that would make him think that he's the author of our Mishnah here in Yom?
I don't see it because it's in the Mishnah in Me'ila, they're talking about Tuma, and that's not applicable here.
That's not applicable, but what, be a little more conceptual. What concept do we get from Rabbi Yeshua?
Saruf.
So what's our problem here in Yoma? We have achila and we have shtia. And Mishnah says they're not mitzdaref.
Oh, because
Okay.
the shirim are not shaveh.
And so our assumption is maybe the reason they're not mitzdaref is because the shiurim are not the same shiurim. What do I see from Rabbi Yoshua?
That if the shirim are not the same, then they don't mitzdaref.
They're not mitzdaref. I could say it just simply like that, where he says shiurov, right? Kol she tumato v'shiro shaveh mitzdaref. Tumato v'lo shiuro, meaning kol she tumato shaveh v'shiro lo shaveh. Right? If we add in all the words that are needed in the Mishnah to understand the Mishnah, that's how you would read it. In the first line, it's kol shetumato v'shiro shaveh mitzdaref. Tumato v'lo shiro. If I expand it, it means kol shetumato shaveh v'shiro lo shaveh. And then the next one would be kol shiro shaveh v'tumato lo shaveh. And kol lo shiro v'lo tumato shaveh ein mitzdarfim. So one of them is that if the shiur is not the same, if I have like the things that we went through now and we looked in the Bartenu where we gave the examples. If I have this, let's say, if I have mates and sherets, so the mates is tumato is tumato b'kazayit, and the sherets tumato b'kadasha. So the shiur isn't the same. So they're not mitzdaref. I can't take a little bit of the sherets and a little bit of the mate to be mitzdaref to make one shiur. So that's Rav Chisda's argument. He's saying, who would say that ochel and shoteh on Yom Kippurim are not mitzdaref? It would be Rabbi Yeshua, because he says when you have things that are of two different shiurim, you can't put them together. That's his argument. Let's see Rashi here. Rashi says, we learn it in a machloket that we learned elsewhere, not here in this Mishnah. Shnuya b'mishnatenu. That same machloket is the machloket that's the basis that we're learning now in our Mishnah. V'lo k'divrei hakolhi, and it's not. And our Mishnah isn't going like all opinions. Ela Rabbi Yeshua. It's only going like the Rabbi Yeshua side of this machloket. And then we bring the klal of Rabbi Yeshua, kol shetumato v'shiro shaveh. And here it's going to repeat essentially what we saw in the Bartanura. Shetumatan v'shiuran shaveh kigon shnei chatzei zeitim mishnei meitim o mishtei nevelot o shtei chatzei adasha mishnei shratzim. Right? Shizman tumatan shaveh v'shiuran shaveh utamei b'shiur achad. That the amount of time that they make somebody tamei is the same. Right? As long as their shiur is the same, they're mitamei, they're mitzdaref. But what if the tuma is the same? In other words, it imparts tuma for the same amount of time, but the shiur isn't the same. Kigon sheretz nevela. Sheshnehem tumat erev, right? So tumato is the same. If I have a sheretz and I have a chatzizait of sheretz and a chatziz, or whatever, I have a sheretz and a vela, they impart tuma for the same amount of time. But the shiur that you need to impart tuma is different, because I only need a kazayit from, I only need a ka'adasha from a sheretz, but I need a nevela from, I need a kazayit from a nevela to be mitzameh. So what would we think? Because we might think, what if I had a half of a ka'adasha of a sheretz, and I had a kazayit minus a half a ka'adasha? Maybe that little bit of the ka'adasha of the sheretz, I could, if I could mitzaref that with the kazayit pachot chatzi ka'adasha. I can't. They're not mitzaref. They don't work together. That's Rabbi Yeshua's. That's Rabbi Yeshua's shita. Shiro v'lo tumato is an example where the shiur is the same. Would be like a mate and a vela, that each of them are mitameh b'kazayit, but one of them is mitameh for 7 days and one is mitameh only tumatem. Okay, so yeah, so this is Rav Chista's argument. His argument is, when I see in our Mishnah that achila and shtiyah are not mitzaref, then I'll say the reason they're not mitzaref is because they have different shiurim. And Rabbi Yeshua holds that things that have different shiurim, even if they have other things in common for halachic purposes, but if their shiur isn't the same, you can't be mitzaref otam. That's what he says. Our Mishnah is like Rabbi Yeshua. But Rav Nachman says, Rav Nachman Amar, afilu tema rabbanan. Even if you will say the rabbanan, what does that mean? Even if you'll say the rabbanan,
That our Mishnah goes as the Rabbanan rather than Rabbi Yehoshua.
or it goes even according to the rabbanan. In other words, it could
Not,
go
not instead of.
not instead of, right? So that's the afilu tema. Literally means if you will, even if you say afilu tema rabbanan, even if you say that our Mishnah goes like the Rabbanan who disagree with Rabbi Yoshua back in Me'ilah, I could say that here they would agree. Ad kan lo ka'amri Rabbanan hatam ela linyan tuma d'shem tuma chadhi. Over there, the Rabbanan disagreed with Rabbi Yoshua when they were talking about different shiurim of tuma. Why? Why did they disagree with Rabbi Yeshua? Because literally the name of tuma is the same. In other words, the category of tuma is the same. They're all inyanim of tuma. So they don't care, the Rabbanan in Me'ilah, they don't care if the amount of tuma that's imparted by a nevela is different than the amount of tuma that's imparted by a maid. They're all shem tuma. They're all in the category of tuma. So therefore, their shiurim can be mitzaref. That's why they disagreed with Rabbi Yeshua over in Me'ilah. But Avahacha, here meaning where?
In Yoma.
Here in Yoma, mishum mituve data. Here it's because of Yishuv Hadat. What's because of Yishuv Hadat?
The reason why we don't get Siruf of Ochel and Shtia is that these are two different modalities of Yishuv Hadat.
Very good. V'hai lo miyat v'date. And this will not put one's mind at rest. This will not give Yishuv Hadat. What will not give Yishuv Hadat?
Combining Ochel and Shtia.
Right. So if you have less than a shiur of ochel and less than a shiur of shtiyah, if I eat, I have a half a shiur of each, let's say, or even if I go further and I'll say, I'll figure out the volumetric measurement of each. In other words, Azov, you might say the reason I can't be mitzaref is because the measurements are entirely different. But you know what? I could figure out the measurements. They're both volumetric measurements. So I can figure out how much I would have to combine together to make, let's say, the shiur of a kikotevet together, half a kikotevet of food and half a kikotevet, the equivalent, the volumetric measure of half a kikotevet of liquid, of drinking something. That's not the problem. The problem is that when you do that, the person who's consuming it will not get Yishuv Hadat. And so that informs us now about how to understand our Mishnah. The Mishnah here is saying everybody holds, Rabbi Yeshua and the Rabbanan that have disagreed with him about Siruf Shiurim Legabei Tumah, everybody agrees here that you can't combine this shiurim of ochel and shtiyah because it's not a technical problem, it's a conceptual issue. There's a conceptual problem here. That is, I won't get Yishuv Hadat by having less than a shiur either of ochel or of shtiyah. Okay? So that's what we got out of learning the Mishnah and Mehila, that there are cases where different things can be mitzdarif, that and it's a machloket between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbanan, let's say, when they're mitzdarif. There are more examples of that in the Mishnah and Mehila. So when you learn Mehila, you'll see other discussions about Siruf Shiurim. But for our purposes, that was enough here. And here, essentially, we're going to repeat this part of the sugya because it was also learned by as a machoket between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. V'chein amar Reish Lakish. Similarly, Reish Lakish said, "V'machloket shnuya." It was learned as a machloket. Rabbi Yeshuhi. What was learned as a machloket? What's he referring back to?
I believe that he's referring back to the Siruf Meila.
Not yet.
He's
Not yet. But it says b'machloket shnuya. What is that? What was b'machloket shnuya? What was learned as a machloket? So look back at we were essentially just repeating what we said earlier. Mishnah says Ocha v'shoteh ein mitzdarfin. Gemara asks Man Tana, Amar Rav Chisda b'machloket shnuya. So what was our question? Who was the Tana that learned our Mishnah? What did Rav Chisda answer? B'machloket shnuya. That's the first part of his answer. What was a machloket?
Whether ochel and shtiyah can combine.
Yeah. Rashi, and again, what did Rashi say here? It says b'machoket hashnuya b'makom acher shnuya b'mishnatenu. In other words, this was a machoket that was learned elsewhere that's pertinent to our Mishnah. And here, our Mishnah goes like Rabbi Yeshua. So that's what Reish Lakish is saying. The Gemara is just, for brevity's sake, is skipping the quote of the Mishnah and skipping the question of Mantana. And it's telling us that Reish Lakish answered that question of Mantana the same way that Rav Nachman answered it, or Rav Chisda answered it, sorry. Same way that Rav Chisda answered. He said, our Mishnah was learned as a machloket based on a machloket elsewhere. I know it from the Mishnah Me'ila. Based on that, our Mishnah here is b'machloket shnuya, and our Mishnah is going like Rabbi Yeshua's side of that machloket. Ditnan chalam Rabbi Yeshua v'chulei. Right. So then he quotes the Mishnah from Me'ila. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan, who was the Bar Plukta of Rish Lakish, he says no. Afilu tema Rabbanan, even if you will say the Rabbanan. What does that mean? Afilu tema Rabbanan.
You say it goes as the Rabbanan as well.
Right. Even if you will say that our Mishnah is also like the Rabbanan, how would that work? I could say it like this. I could even say that the Mishnah goes like the Rabbanan, not just like Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yeshua. How would that work? Ad kan lo ka'amri Rabbanan hatam elali inyan tuma. There, the reason that Rabbi Yeshua and the Rabbanan were cholek is because Rabbanan disagreed regarding tuma. And here it leaves out the reason. What's the inyan of tuma? Rav Nachman said, "D'shem tuma chadhi," because the Rabbanan hold that the category of tuma is all the same. So I could be mitzaref different. That's how I can be mitzaref different shiurim because they're all tuma. But here in Yoma, when I'm talking about eating and drinking, my concern is whether or not somebody gets Yishuv Hadat, and they won't get Yishuv Hadat by having less than a shiur of achilah, less than a shiur of shtia, even if they had half a shiur of each, or even if, as I say, even if you manage to get the same volumetric shiur by combining them. So Adkan. So that's how the Gemara concludes. Okay. We're going to start the next sugya, and then we'll pick up from there again next week. The next sugya begins with the next Mishnah. So, of course, we learned the Mishnah a long time ago, but now we'll review this Mishnah, and we'll see if Gemara takes it apart. Achal v'shata be'elem echad. Eino chayav ela chatat achat. If somebody ate and drank in one unconscious state, they're only chayav one chatat. So what does that mean practically? Explain that to me.
So, for example, if you didn't realize that it's Yom Kippur and you ate and drank, you're only hayav for one chatat.
Okay, and that's correct. And we'll just make it a little bit stronger. We'll say, if you ate a shiur and you drank a shiur, right? You drank a melo lugmav and you ate a kotevet agasa, but you did it, for example, not knowing that you're not allowed, that today was Yom Kippur, or not knowing or not realizing that you're not allowed to eat and drink on Yom Kippur. You only bring, then when you find out your mistake, your shkagan, you only bring one chatat. So what's the chidush here? Why is that now something that we might not have known?
Because
go ahead.
no, we are. I mean, until now, it has sounded like you are both for shir of achila and a shir of shtia.
Say that again. I'm not sure I understood what you said.
So
I think I know what you're saying, but I want to hear you say it.
So
go ahead.
Maybe to be a little bit more precise, until now it has sounded like the assumption, like our working assumption was that if you eat a shiur, I mean, if you if you eat a shiur and you drink a shiur, you're liable for a chatat for each one.
Very good. In other words, and why would I think that? Why would I think I would have? Why would I think that I need to bring a separate chatat for each one?
Because each one brings yishuv hadas.
Each one brings yeshuva dat. And what did what did we just say a moment ago in the Mishnah, Michael Schwartz?
They don't mitzdaref.
That
Or you
the
would think that
shiurim
they
are
would be
not
separate.
mitzaref. Right, the shiurim are not mitzaref. So now I would think like what Michael Werner said. Look, if the shiurim are not mitzaref, so that could maybe that informs me that from the Torah point of view, they're essentially two separate isurim because they each have a separate shiur. If they're two separate isurim, then I would bring a chatat for each of them. So the chidush of the Mishnah is no, despite the fact that they have different shiurim, but if I am over, if I eat and drink behelem echad, a shiur of each, then I still only bring one chatat. Nonetheless, achila and shtiyah are really part of the same isur.
So could it be, I mean, it sounds almost like the chatat is brought for the state of nechelem itself.
The state of
The state of the state in this states of being the shogeg.
Yes, exactly. In other words, the halem. What does it mean halem echad? That if you didn't know that you're not allowed to eat and drink on Yom Kippur, or you didn't realize that today is Yom Kippur, even though you knew you're not allowed to eat and drink. So that's the halem. They have halem echad, and so eino chayav ela chatat echad. Okay, so that's a bit of a chidush because of what we said before, that the shiurim are not mitzaref, but despite the fact that the shiurim are not mitzaref, nonetheless they're considered to be the same isur. And if you're over behalem echad, you only bring one chatat.
So
However,
I mean, does this apply from one kippur to another? So let's say you have, a Baal Tshuva who goes through his entire life not knowing you don't eat on Yom Kippur, and suddenly he realizes, oh, wait a second, I'm not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur. He's basically liable for one chatat for the entire length of his life, even though it covers several Yom Kippur.
There's a Mishnah in I think it's one of the Mishnahs in the beginning of the 7th chapter of Shabbat. I can bring it up right away. I'll show you. It's about Shabbat, but the same thing would apply to your question here. Hold on. Al Gadol. Just a sec. Does everybody see that? Yeah. This is the beginning of the 7th chapter of Shabbat. Klal Gadol Amru b'Shabbat. There's a great general principle that the Chachamim said regarding Shabbat. Kol hashocheach ikar Shabbat, v'yasa melachot harbe, v'shabbatot harbe, eino chayav el chatat echad. Somebody who forgot, and this would include somebody who never knew, but somebody who forgot the principle of Shabbat, and he did a lot of melachot over many Shabbatot, he only brings one chatat. Right? And Bartunu explains Hashocheach Ikar Shabbat Kasavur ain't Shabbat B'Torah. He thinks that there is no such Isur, any of the Isurim associated with Shabbat. And this includes, so the fiduciary is kol shokech. Even at one point in his life he knew, but then he forgot. He's only chayav one chatat for all of the Shabbatot that he violated. The kula shkaga chadahi. It's all one act of shkaga. Dichtiv et shabtotai tishmoru. And what does that imply? Mashma shmira achat Shabbatot harbe. And then it goes into other permutations. Hayodei yikar Shabbat v'asam melachot harbe b'Shabbatot harbe chayav al kol Shabbat b'Shabbat. So somebody did know the yikar of Shabbat, but nonetheless, right? He violates Shabbat. He does many melachot on many Shabbatot. So he's chayav for each and every Shabbat. What does that mean? Hayodei yikar Shabbat sheyesh Shabbat b'Torah. What does it mean? He knows the principle of Shabbat. He knows that there's Torah that says there's such a thing as Shabbat. B'nasru bo melachot. We're not allowed to do melacha on Shabbat. V'yasa melachot harbe b'Shabbatot harbe al yidei shigagat Shabbat. He did a lot of melachot on many Shabbatot with some unconscious relationship to Shabbat. She'eino yodeh she'Shabbat hayom. Maybe he didn't realize that today was Shabbat. But since he knows that in principle you're not allowed to violate Shabbat, chayav kol Shabbat v'Shabbat chatat achad. V'alzena amar v'shabru b'nei Yisrael et Shabbat, d'mashma shmira l'chol Shabbat v'Shabbat. Klomar shechayav chatat al kol Shabbat v'Shabbat. So since he knows Yikar Shabbat, each Shabbat is an act of shkaga. If you didn't at all know the Ikar of Shabbat, then all of the Shabbatot is one ha'alem, is one act of shkaga. And I'll just read the last one. Hayodeshu Shabbat. Somebody knows that today is Shabbat. Chayav al kol av mlacha umlacha. Somebody who knows. He knows Yikar Shabbat, he knows today is Shabbat, and he does a lot of melachot on many Shabbatot. So there, it's bishkaga, but he did the melachot bishkaga. Either he didn't realize that today is Shabbat, or he didn't realize that particular melacha, he forgot that melacha is asu b'Shabbat. Then he's chayav for each category of melacha. And the last thing it says, if you do a lot of melachot, but they're really essentially from the same melacha, so you have like an av and a tolda, you're only chayav one chata. So that last category is a little bit similar conceptually to what we're talking about here, as we will see.
If I can interrupt you, I'm interested in that verb shokeach.
Yeah.
And I can think of sort of two ways of reading it. Either it's saying that not knowing is like forgetting, or it could be saying that it really is forgetting, that in some way we all really know. Like it's almost like a kind of natural law. It's sort of inscribed in us. And that if we don't know, in some sense, we've forgotten what we instinctively knew.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily just say the second one. I think like I think in the Mishnah you have to take it in the first way you said, which is a simpler way. It's some shochech means that you knew something and then you forgot it. It left your conscious, information that you can reach consciously. I'm going to leave it at that for the purposes of our discussion. But that's what it seems to mean there. This, by the way, this is where the Gemara is going to talk about the case of the Tinok Shenishba. What if somebody never knew? Right? So the Mishnah talks about somebody who knew, but he forgot. But certainly someone who never knew, like a child who had been captured and lived among non-Jews their whole life, right? They were captured as a child, and so they never knew about Shabbat until maybe they got much older. So they can't be held culpable for each and every Av Melacha and each and every Shabbat. They didn't even know such a thing as Shabbat existed. So, but similarly, somebody who knew but forgot is also not going to be culpable. Okay, back to our Mishnah in Yoma. So achal v'shata behem. So that was to answer your question. What if you did? What if you did? What if you did this on many Yomei Kippurim over a long period of time? Now, if you ate half of a shiur on this Yom Kippur and half of a shiur on the next Yom Kippur, there you won't be chayav because you have to, the chilan shtiyah has to be done within a certain amount of time. But if you ate let's say you ate all day on Yom Kippur, and the next year you ate all day on Yom Kippur, but in each case you didn't realize that that day was Yom Kippur. So then you would only bring one chatat. Based on, if it's the same as Shabbat, then based on that you'd only bring one chatat. But if you that would be if you had forgotten the principle of Yom Kippur. But if you knew that there was such a thing as Yom Kippur, and then you were shogeg about this Yom Kippur, and you shogeg about that Yom Kippur, then you would bring 2 korbanot chatat. So, kishiyabanei beit hamikdash b'meirav yameinu, you'll have to be much more concerned about this. But I'm smiling also. But look, I'm totally fascinated by this whole issue of when you bring a korban chatat and when you're not. I just find the whole issue very interesting, very fascinating. I'm not going to delve into some of my thoughts on that tonight. Let's just get through the Mishnah, and that'll be it for tonight. So, achal v'shatan behelem echad, eno chayav el chatat echad. However, achal v'asa melacha chayav shtei chataot. What if you ate and then you did melacha? When? When are we talking about?
Yom Kippur.
On Yom Kippur, right? So the Torah tells us you're not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur. It also tells us you're not allowed to do melacha on Yom Kippur. So if I eat and I do melacha, I have to bring 2 chataot. Why?
There are 2 different categories, 2 different isurim.
They're 2 different isurim. In the case of achila v'shtiyah, those are really the same, because really they're both under the category of kol hanefesh asher lo te'uneh. And if you eat or drink, you violated the isur, the implication of not afflicting yourself. But when you do malacha, it's a lo kashur, as the kids say, right? It's not relevant to the question of eating and drinking. So this is what we mean when we say it has a shem acher. It's a different name. It's a different category. Then the Mishnah brings up another issue. Achal ochlin sheinan ru'uyin la'achila, v'shata mashkin sheinan ru'uyin l'shtiyah. V'shata tzir o muryas patur. So somebody ate foods that are not fit to be eaten, or they drank drinks that are not fit to be drunk, or they drank tzir or muryas. Excuse me, like either like brine or the fishy stuff that comes with fish that's also very salty. In all of these cases, you're patur. Actually, I didn't put this here. The Bach reads the Mishnah a little bit differently. Hold on a second. because the last line, it sounds like it's three. The way we have the Mishnah, it sounds like three things. Either that achal ochlin shenan ru'uyin, shatam mashkin shenan ru'uyin, vishatat tzira morias. But shatat tzira morias is an example of the last thing. So. Right, so the Mishnah should say mashkin she'enan ru'uyin l'shtiyah patur. I'll have to correct this in my copy. In other words, it should say achal ochlin she'enan ru'uyin la'achila v'shata mashkin she'enan ru'uyin l'shtiyah patur. There should be a word patur here. And then it says v'shata tzira morias patur. Okay. What did Rashi say here? So about the first part of the Mishnah, achal v'shata be'elen echad eino chayav ela chatat echad. Dichad shmahu. They're one name. They're one category. Dachila shtiyah mechad kra nafki. Eating and drinking come out of one pasuk, which is the pasuk of a kol nefesh asher lo tuneh. Achal v'yasa malacha trei shemot yinhu. There are two names. There are two categories. Dimitrei krai nafka. They come from two psukim. And actually, even though they appear both in the same pasuk in Vayikra, but nonetheless, they're two psukim for this. Not that they're not the Masoretic pasuk, but they're two inyanim in the pasuk. Okay. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to read into the next part of the sugya, and that's where we'll pick up next time. Amare, so in the next sugya, I'll just give you a little bit of an introduction. It's a very interesting discussion. It's the likes of which we haven't seen yet, where the Gemara is going to speculate essentially about why the Torah worded the issue of eating and drinking in the way that it did. In other words, why didn't the Torah just say you're not allowed to eat and drink on Yom Kippur? Why did it talk about Inui Nefesh? And this will get into a little bit of some of the technicalities of Midrash Halacha. Amar Reish Lakish, Mimnei ma lo ne'amra azhara bi'inui. Why wasn't an azhara said by Inui? We're going to explain this better, like in more depth next time. But an azhara is a place where the Torah says, don't do something. Just broadly speaking, that's an azhara. It says, like, lo taseh kol melacha. That's an azhara. So why didn't the Torah say an azhara regarding this issue of inui nefesh on Yom Kippur? It doesn't say. It doesn't give it in that language of an azhara. Mishum delo, and so he answers his own question. He says, "Mishum delo efshar." It can't. It's impossible. There's no way that the Torah could have worded it as an azhara. Hey, nichtov, because how would we write it? Nichtov rachmana lo yochal. So let's say the Torah could write, "Don't eat." Achila, because if it just said "don't eat," it's not going to give me the same din, because achila is defined as eating a kazayit, and we know that on Yom Kippur you have the shiur of kikotevet. Yichtov rachmana lo tu'uneh. So let the Torah write, don't afflict. Then what would that mean? Kumacho mashma. That would mean don't afflict, meaning, so get up and eat. That means that would tell you to eat. This is Reish Lakish's question and answer. He's positing so we're going to explain this better next week. Everybody's encouraged to look at this and try to understand it yourself. But we'll explain it in greater depth next week. But what we get from Reish Lakish basically is he makes an argument that the reason the Torah doesn't use a lashon of azhara on Yom Kippur about Inui Nefesh is because it can't. There's no way that that the Torah could have written this in any other way. And then we'll see, he's going to be challenged. He'll be challenged by Rav Oshia and Rav Bibi bar Abaye, and finally by Rav Ashi. And the challenge of Rav Oshia is going to be answered. The challenge of Rav Bibi bar Abaye is going to be answered. And only the challenge of Rav Ashi can't be answered. That's the quick summary of the sugya that we're going to do. So that's it for tonight. And Bezrat Hashem, I'll see you all next week.
Night, thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
חודש טוב, תודה.
חודש טוב.
Harish Tov.
Bye-bye.